This is still Lesson 9.5, Factoring Trinomials of the type x squared plus bx plus c. We did in the first video example 1 and example 2, and we're continuing on in this video hopefully with example 3 and finishing up with example 4. So now we're going to learn about factoring trinomials with a negative c. In example 1 and example 2 we worked with x squared plus bx plus c, where everything was positive, and we also did x squared minus bx plus c. So now we're dealing with trinomials that have a negative c, meaning their last term, the constant, is negative. So we still have the same method. We still want to find the factors of our last term, which in this case is a negative 48, that add to be our middle term. So we want to find the sum of 13. So you have to ask yourself, what kind of numbers would you multiply together in order to get a negative number? Well, one has to be positive and one has to be negative. So that's what we're going to be doing in this one. We have to list a little more, might need a little more room here, because we're going to start with negative 1 and 48. When you add those together, you get 47. Then we're going to put the negative on the other number to get our other option, because we could put the negative on the 1, or we could put it on the 48. So we could do positive 1 and negative 48, which would then give us negative 47. Next, we would have 2, or negative 2 and 24. Negative 2 plus 24 would give us 22, or you could put the negative on the 24. 2 and negative 24, which would give us negative 22. Next, we would have 3, negative 3, and 16, which would give us positive 13. Oh, I think we found it. Or we could do positive 3 and negative 16, which would give us negative 13. Now we could keep going, but we did find the numbers we needed, so I'm going to stop there. All we need is that negative 3 and the 16. So now when we go ahead to write our binomials, our factor, we have x as our first term in each binomial, minus 3 and plus 16, minus 3 in one and plus 16 in the other. Remember, you have to keep those signs. So since it's a negative 3, we have minus 3. It's a positive 16, so we have plus 16. And again, to check it, you just FOIL. So here's our answer. Well, let's go ahead and check it. X times x squared, x times 16 plus 16x, negative 3 times x, negative 3x, and negative 3 times 16, negative 48. Combine like terms, x squared plus 13x minus 48, and we do in fact get what we started with. So let's try one more. Same method. We want to find the factors of negative 24 that add to be negative 5. So again, if we're going to multiply two numbers together to get a negative, one has to be positive and one has to be negative. So I'll start with negative 1 and positive 24, which would give me a positive 23. Then positive 1 and negative 24, and I get a negative 23. Then we have negative 2 and 12, negative 2 times 12, negative 24. And when we add those together, we get a positive 10. And then we could have 2 and negative 12, which would give us a negative 10. Next, we could have negative 3 and 8, which would give us a positive 5. Or we could have positive 3 and negative 8, which would give us a negative 5. Again, I think we found it. We could keep going. There are more factors of negative 24, but since we found the numbers we need, we might as well stop. So when we factor, we end up with our two binomials, the first term being n in each one, positive 3 and a negative 8, so plus 3 and negative 8. The order doesn't matter. You could put negative 8 here and positive 3 here. Either way, when you multiply, you should end up with the same thing. So here's our answer. And you know how to check it by now, so if you'd like to check it, you may check it on your own. Let's look at quick check 3. We're still factoring each expression with a negative c. So we have the factors of negative 20 that add to be 8. So if you're trying to find the factors of a negative number, again, one always has to be positive and one always has to be negative. So we'll start with negative 1 and 20, which gives us 19. Then positive 1 and negative 20, which gives us negative 19. Negative 2 and 10, which gives us a positive 8. And there we found it, our two numbers that multiply to be negative 20, but add to be 8, and we have our answer. M is our variable in our first position, M and M, and then we have a -2 and +10. Again, you know how to check these now on your own, so feel free to check them if you'd like. Let's try one more. We're finding the factors of our last term that add to be our middle term. So let's look. I don't think we're going to end up doing this C, so let me get rid of that there and we'll give us a little bit more room. Factors of -40 and the sum of -3. You know what? I think we can skip a couple of these factors and 40 because I know our two factors are going to have to be pretty close together in order for us to end up with a sum of -3. If we do 1 and 40, we're going to end up with 39, -39. Those are really big numbers. So let's skip down. We could do 2 and 20. Those are still big numbers. 3 doesn't work. We could do 4 and 10. That's still a difference of 6. And then after that, we have 5 times 8. There we go. So let's try -5 and 8. -5 times 8 gives us -40. And when you add them, you get a +3. So we must need a 5 and -8. 5 times -8 gives us -40, and we end up with a -3. So if you didn't like skipping those, you go ahead and write every single one of those factors if you need to. But there we have it right there, 5 and -8. And we'll write our two binomials. Remember that these are equal to each other, our original trinomial and our binomials. All we're doing is breaking this trinomial down into two binomials. So we get P plus 5 and P minus 8. There we have it. All right, last example, example 4. Now we're factoring trinomials that have two variables. Don't worry, it's really not any more difficult than anything we've been doing. We're just going to tack on one more variable when we write out our binomials. We're still using the same method. We want to find the factors of our last term that add to be our middle term. So we're still using those same rules that we've been using, which is if we need two numbers to multiply to be a negative number, then we need one positive number and one negative number. So we could start with 1 and 60, but we know that's going to be too big. 2 and 30 is also too big. 3 and 20, I think, is going to be our ticket. So we could do -3 and 20. -3 times 20 is -60. If you add them together, you get 17. So there's our answer right there. We're using -3 and 20. So here we go. Our first variable is still D in both of our binomials. We're still using D in both of our binomials. Where this G comes into play is on your second term. So instead of just writing D minus 3, it's D minus 3, G. Just tack on that other variable. And instead of writing D plus 20, it's D plus 20, G. Again, just tack on that other variable. So let's FOIL this one out so we can see how it really works. D times D, D squared. D times 20G plus 20DG. Remember, when you multiply, you just smush everything together. Then -3G times D is -3DG. And finally, -3G times 20G is plus -3 times 20, sorry. -3 times 20 is -60. G times G, G squared. Combine like terms, D squared plus 20DG minus 3DG, so it's 20 minus 3, 17DG minus 60G squared. So you see, we end up with what we started with. Don't make this harder than it has to be. All you're going to do is the same thing we've been doing in this whole lesson. Find your factors of your last term that add to be your middle term, and then tack on that second variable with your second term in each one of your binomials. So here's our answer. And let's try a couple more just to be sure we've got it. So we're going to factor these expressions. Again, I want to find the factors of my last term that add to be my middle term. So here we have a positive number here and a positive number here, so we know that all we're going to be using are positive factors. 1 times 24, that's too big. 2 times 12, that's too big. 3 and 8 would work. 3 times 8, 24. 3 plus 8 gives us 11. So we're going to use 3 and 8 in our binomial. Our first variable is always that first term in your trinomial, so x and x. Then we have plus 3y and plus 8y. And you can FOIL that out to see that you will in fact end up with x squared plus 11xy plus 24y squared. Let's try one more and we'll be finished with this lesson. So again, I want to find the factors of negative 48 that add to be my middle term of 2. So I could do 1, or again, since it's negative, I have to do a negative number times a positive number. So I could do 1 and 48, but that's too big to get the sum of 2. 2 and 24, again, they have a difference of 22. That's too big. 3 and 16 is too big. 4 and, say 2 and 24, 3 and 16, 4 and 12, too big. 6 and 8. So 6 and 8 would give me a difference of 2. So I could do negative 6 and 8. Negative 6 times 8, negative 48. Negative 6 plus 8, that gives me a positive 2. So there we have our two factors, and we can write our two binomials. V goes in the first position in both binomials, minus 6, and then tack on that second variable, W, plus 8, and again tack on that other variable, W. There's your answer. Again, if you need to check it, just FOIL it out.